Yo, 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 it's your girl and boy CT. I'm Cindy Barnes.
And I'm Travis Barnes.
And we are the founders of the Overcomers Podcast.
The Overcomers Podcast is designed to help you overcome adversity and live your dreams. Every week, we will be sharing stories of people who found their strength in their struggle. The Overcomers Podcast is sponsored by Journey 333, and that's a lot of threes, so let me tell you what it is. It's fitness, coaching, and nutrition. It is a place where we help you to look better, live better, and feel better, and it is mind, body, spirit. Today, we're going to help you get your mind right with our special guest.
Hello, Overcomer Nation. I am Cindy Barnes.
And I'm Travis Barnes.
And we're the founders of the Overcomers Podcast.
The Overcomers Podcast, sponsored by Journey 333. That's a lot of threes. That's fitness, coaching, and nutrition, mind, body, spirit, where we help you to look better, live better, and feel better. Today, I'm super excited because at all the Journey locations, we use this awesome piece of equipment called a Sandbag. And I got the Sandbag Master on here, the Sandbag Guru, okay? Let me tell you a little bit about Josh Henkin. He is on here today. He's the CEO of Ultimate Sandbag Training and creator of the Ultimate Sandbag and the Dynamic Variable Resistance Training System. Has been teaching continuing education programs for over 15 years in 13 different countries, consulted and created programs for all populations, from the U.S. Marines to the Division I programs, to hospital wellness programs, to including you and me, right? And let me tell you, I'm so excited because Josh is going to be one of the presenters at Perform Better in Providence, Rhode Island. So if you're listening to this show and you're thinking about, where can I go and learn more? He is regularly on the Perform Better tour. I know we're talking about Providence because that's the one that's going to be coming up shortly after this episode, but he's presenting at all the different ones and in many other places. So Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for making time, and thank you for doing what you've done for our clients over the years. We love this Sandbag.
I love to hear that. That's awesome to hear.
Yeah, we were using them just this week. We were doing Sandbag bear crawls, and we were doing the cleans, and we were doing all kinds of things in here. So, well, Josh, I think maybe just before we get into the sandbags and what you're going to be talking about at Perform Better, maybe just letting our audience get to know you a little bit. I'd like to go even a little bit deeper than what inspired you to do the Sandbag itself, but what first got you involved in this industry?
I think learning very early on that my NBA career was not going to occur in high school. Just quickly finding out the lack of athleticism was not going to allow me to become a professional athlete. And then I was very fortunate enough in high school, though, to have a coach who was an assistant strength coach of the Chicago White Sox at the time, baseball team. So he introduced me to this whole idea of strength and conditioning. I'm like, oh my gosh, you can have a career training athletes. How cool is that? So he started, giving me information, and it was the infancy of functional training at the time. So, it was the first books about, people like Vern Gambetta and lots of other people. And it gave me early exposure, just fed my hunger to want to learn more and to do more in the industry and to get into something that I thought was really exciting.
Wow, it's really cool to hear how a coach was a difference maker in your life, inspiring you to get on the right path. Josh, I remember not too long ago, actually, even witnessing, was it a neck injury that you had? I know that you've overcome a lot, so I guess my question is going to be, how has adversity shaped your life and maybe even inspired much of what you do today?
I think in lots of ways, I do have a degenerative spinal disease. It was diagnosed when I was 14 years old. And so they just didn't know how the extent that was going to be. So it's accelerated in the point to, in the last 10 years, I've had 7 spinal surgeries. My cervical spine's fused from C3 to T2. I have a lumbar fusions from L4 to S1. During that time, it compromised my spine quite a bit. So I lost the ability to use my leg twice, inability to use my right arms. So I've had to reteach myself how to walk twice. I still only have about 50% use of my arms. So I would say adversity has shaped my life in every way because it's impacted every aspect of my life. From just being able to do everyday functional activities to, can you sleep, and to your mood, to just dealing with everyday, stressors or, things that you need to address in your life. It just all changes when you have chronic pain and chronic illness.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Geez, you have overcome a lot, and that's a lot to deal with. It makes me want to ask, how has the Sandbag played a role in your recovery? Has that been a tool that you've used to do certain things?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny every time, I share, I'm somewhat hesitant at times to share what's going on with me, because I think in the fitness industry, we can wrap our heads around cancer, right, or other diseases. But when it comes to diseases that impact our orthopedic condition, people instantly go to, well, you did something to cause that. What did you do? And so I think that people sort of often misconstrue. They think it's like, oh, the training caused this, versus the reality, which is I'd literally be in a wheelchair if I didn't do what I do. Yeah. Doctors are often surprised I'm able to be as functional as I am, considering the circumstances. So in every instance, I basically rehab myself, not because I don't think there's any good therapists out there. I'm married to a very good one. So I get to cheat that a little bit, but even she's like, you understand the body, you understand what you need to do. So it's been very integral from the standpoint of, a lot of people don't understand when you get to the extreme level I was at, like you're unable to walk. Like I literally had to physically pick up my right leg. You need to think at the most foundational level, how are you going to teach your body to start moving again? And so for me, it was using the tool as a feedback mechanism. It was a way to assist me to understand, to teach my body to reteach it. How is it going to function again? Because when you have nerve damage, especially, nerves regenerate incredibly slowly. I think it's like a millimeter every 6 months, maybe something like that. It's a very, and no doctor will ever tell you that you'll get full restoration of the nerves either. So it's like, when things don't function correctly, when you're in this position, how are you going to teach your body how to function correctly, or function at a level that allows you to enjoy life, the things that are meaningful to you? So for me, it's what we do with our Ultimate Sandbag. It's not the only tool that we use. It's something that we use obviously a great deal. Allowed me to rehab to a point where I can. To me, a great compliment is when people go, you don't look like you have an illness. And there's sort of it's not really a joke, but a saying in chronic illness that, it's the invisible illness that's the toughest for people to appreciate because they can't see it. So to them, you're not ill, you're not sick, especially if they see you doing things. But my condition, as I explain to people, will never get better. It will just be managed. If anything's going to continue to get worse. So to me, it's also putting off the progressiveness of the disease to the point where I can have a higher quality of life for a longer period of time.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is so true. I worry about the same things myself when I have an injury or something going on. I've recently committed myself to a very intense race. It's one of the world's toughest. It's a death race. The founder Spartan invited me, and so I just said yes. And here I am.
You're easy to convince of silly things, huh?
Yeah, I am. Yeah, right. But prior to that, I really wasn't running a lot, and I didn't do that because of sacroiliac bulging disc in my lower back. And I know that it's easy for people to think, oh, well, what did he do to cause that? But the truth is, I got a running coach I've been running with, and he's a little guy, and his body's just built for it. And he'll run 6 miles with me, and then he'll go do 6 miles a night. And I mean, his body, the world or whatever, the universe blessed him with that genetic makeup, and it blessed me with kind of a husky makeup to where when I run too far, my hips sore, my knees sore, it's just, so, we all have these different things to deal with. And I'm glad that the Sandbag has been integral in your recovery, or at least in keeping your ability to manage this illness. The story that everybody wants to hear is, the Sandbag, right? Let's talk about that. Like, how did it come to be? I remember you and I being in a mastermind together back with the Cosgroves, kind of when things were just beginning, or really just getting started. So tell us a little bit about how it all came to be, if you would.
Sure. Kind of the Cliff Notes version is that, I had gone in college into the strength conditioning program. So I was going towards that goal of strength conditioning. I was thinking, like, am I going to go to a university setting? What was I going to do? So I interned a lot and, got to understand, the ins and outs of training athletes. And during that time, I was also, so interested in the industry. I started looking outside, like what were current professionals doing outside of the university setting. And there was a lot of interesting people that were just coming up. This is the late 90s. So people like Charles Poliquin were writing it was the first time strength conditioning because we're writing for mainstream magazines. Right. Up to that point, it had just been like bodybuilding coaches. So, I started interning with all these other coaches and just hearing these things. And I remember one coach told me, hey, it was around 2002, go check out this kettlebell thing. And I, went online, I looked at it, I'm like, I don't know, that looks a lot like what you can do with dumbbells. I don't get it.
Right.
And he's like, just trust me, go to the program. You're going to learn a lot. And I remember going to the program, this is 2003, and Pavel coming out and saying, the kettlebell was just a vehicle to teach this idea of movement. And movement was not a term I'd heard in all the time that I'd gone, through my internships and my education at the university. We were taught lifts, we were taught muscles, we were taught, things like that. So I'm like, what is this whole thing of movement? It was such a unique approach to train the body. And obviously the benefits were so rapid. And I'm like, afterwards, I want to know more. I want to, find out everything. He's like, go read the old stuff, the stuff from the late 1800s, early 1900s. And why that period is because back then it was more physical culture. So the idea was, and this goes back to ancient Greece, that, physical health was part of the whole citizen, of the whole person. Like you couldn't have true intelligence and health and be a good citizen in your community if you didn't have physical health. Mm-hmm. It didn't mean elite fitness. It just meant physical health. And so there was a lot of balance upon, like mobility, stability, just in different ways, like in gymnastics and wrestling. And, just as much as you find someone lifting weights, you'd see them doing a handstand. Yeah. So it was one of those things I'm like, oh, this is really intriguing. But the only problem was that, this is obviously pre-internet, they weren't able to communicate very readily, a lot of these different, people. So it wasn't like a unified philosophy and so I always chuckle when people are like, oh, the old time lifters. I'm like, which one? They're all doing different things. It wasn't like they had this unified system that they're all promoting. So I was trying to find commonalities within them. And of course, also being a former athlete, when I read, a lot of them mentioning, odd objects being like, both basically the way they described odd objects is what we would think of as stability training today. Mm-hmm. Like they were talking about building tendon and ligament muscle strength, and, things that the barbell couldn't do, filling in the holes with something. And so when they would then go into the sandbag was the hardest of them, that former athlete side of me came in and was like, I want to go do the hardest thing. And so I did the whole, Army duffel garbage bag thing because I didn't have any idea that this is something I wanted to pursue. I just was like, oh, this is going to be great to add in my training. I remember doing my first 80-pound sandbag in my garage and getting my butt handed to me. And considering I had a background of many years of lifting, I'm like, how does this 80-pound bag kick my butt? So like any good coach, I then started applying it to all my clients. And, they loved the novelty of it, the intensity of it, and how challenging it was. But very shortly, within, I would say the first 4 to 6 weeks, it became very apparent that if we didn't have a purpose or a goal with it, it was just novelty. And so when I started to sit back and look at those, I try to find as much information I could on sandbag training because I often say the internet loves to remind me I didn't invent sandbag training. Never said I did, but, so I wanted to find, and all I could find were a couple pages here, a couple pages there. And it was not like an encompassing system. It was just like, here's some exercises, here's some things you can do. And so I ended up sitting back and go, well, the problem has to be either the tool, the way we use the tool, or both. And so what I came up with was really, it was both. That in no other example, as you guys can probably look around your gym and go, do we have a homemade piece of equipment that we really emphasize in our training? Mm-hmm. Everything is made specifically for the job of lifting. So why is this tool not been designed to address a lot of the limitations and things that we need to do in order to make it a tool that we would value in the fitness setting? And secondly, how is this tool supposed to be used? Because it's not a barbell, it's not a dumbbell. And while that sounds, obvious, there are certain attributes that lend itself to being very unique. So oftentimes people say, well, on social media, I'll post something, my wife will post something, can I use something else instead? And we go, you can, it just won't work as well. Because, we tend to have this mentality in fitness that all our tools are the same. And I can't think of a larger myth than that. It would be like saying a saw and a hammer are the same just because they're tools. Right. I mean, I can try to use the saw for the job of a hammer, but it's going to be ugly.
Right.
And and fitness is the only industry I can think of where we devalue our tools. Like, imagine if your surgeon said, "Oh, give me a clamp or scalpel, it doesn't matter." Like, you'd be like, "Oh my God," you'd be terrified. But in fitness, because we don't think about the unique aspects of each tool and what they do better than something else, we tend to just clump them all together as weights. And so we wanted to completely kind of redefine, how we were thinking about that. Like, what are the unique attributes that the Sandbag could provide that other tools couldn't? Because if it was just something different, it wouldn't be valuable. It had to do things that other tools couldn't provide us that in order to achieve certain outcomes and goals. So one of the reasons I, joined that mastermind you mentioned was because I was frustrated. I'd known Alan before that for quite a few years. Was we had to redefine, it wasn't Sandbag training because that wasn't descriptive, because that wasn't a methodology. We don't say I'm going to do barbell training, because you can do bodybuilding, you can do powerlifting, you can do Olympic lifting, right? That's not descriptive of what the actual training is. And that's why we came up with dynamic variable resistance training, because we want to define the system that's going to dictate how we actually use the implement. You can use our implement badly, or you can use it with great intent and purpose. I always say the tool only gives you the potential to do good things. You have to have the knowledge of how to optimize the tool to actually achieve those great things.
Right. So good. So good. Gosh, I hope you guys are tuning in, Overcomer Nation. There's a lot of good stuff going on here. To just kind of go back to the beginning of what you were saying, it's a shame that we lost that, where to be a good citizen meant to be healthy. Right. To be able to, have a certain level of physical conditioning. I thought that was really good, kind of taking us back. And then I like what you're saying so much about, the tools that we use, and they are different, and they have different abilities and different ways to get things done. Could you define for us like what it means live weight? Like live weight? Like, I mean, clearly some weights aren't alive. So what does that mean?
Well, I'll give you the definition and the way we use it, and then I'll give you an example on the opposite end of the spectrum. So when we say a live weight, people often, and this is fine if this is what starts to get their general interest, is that, a Sandbag is unstable. But to us, I'm like, well, what does that mean it's unstable? Yes, the load can be shifting a little bit, but if you're just moving the weight vertically, you guys probably know this, it doesn't shift a whole lot. Right. So the internal shifting is a very minor component. It can be what it does when you, so let's say, do a clean to fist and you do a press or something like that, is that when you have a slight instability to the implement, it increases the demand for movement accuracy. So in other words, you can't just muscle through it, right? Because if you're not accurate with your movement, the load is going to react in a way that doesn't allow you to complete the lift. Like, we've had some very impressively strong individuals that try to muscle through it, and it just destroys them because they can't do it. They have to be accurate with their movements. So in a way, it's looking at movement proficiency as much as it is looking at strength. And so that's one attribute. But the other one is what's very unique with Ultimate Sandbag is we use dimension as a component. So no other tool do they deliberately use dimension to create different outcomes. So obviously with the bags, they can be small, they can be big, but that changes their instability level too, and what we can do with them in certain exercises we may emphasize. So for example, if I'm holding a small USB in the crooks of my arms and doing a squat, well, that's not giving me a lot of feedback, and that will give me a lot of that core stability that I want to help me in my squat. On the other side, if I use our biggest bags, it pushes my arms forward, so it increases the amount of weight trying to pull me forward. So I have to use more core stability in order to perform that squat. So not only are my legs being very taxed, but so is my whole trunk, because I have to fight that dimension when to pull me into forward momentum. So, we use dimension, we use the actual instability of the implement, but then we can use also the idea that we can position it in different ways that allow us to, challenge the body to be light. For example, a squat is an up and down movement. So it's largely a sagittal plane. We call sagittal plane movement, right? Well, if I just put the weight upon my shoulder, I now increase the demands for resist lateral movement and rotation. So I've just made a squat a multi-planar lift in a very simple way. So I made it more practical, because how many times do you go to squat and you're like, hold on, I got to be perfectly balanced. Hold on, I'm going to sit up. Everything's perfectly, prepared. If you just think about, squatting down to pick up a kid or squatting down to pick up your groceries or something, like, you're talking about things that tend not to be perfect. And then the last version is that we can just move in different directions and positions that really we don't get to train in, I would say, familiar strength training programs. And that's important because movement is like learning a language. There's something called movement vocabulary. Yeah. So, if you're learning a new language, you can, if you only learn a couple of words, you can only express yourself in a limited number of ways, right? But if you know a lot of words, you can express yourself a lot of different ways. And that's like movement. So while people like to say, oh, if you just get strong at deadlift and a squat and a bench press, you'll be good at everything else. That's scientifically not true. That's actually been proven over and over not to be true. But it gives people the excuse in their mind to go, I'm just going to do what I'm comfortable with and I'm good at. And so those are a lot of the ways. And if you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, like the barbell, people often be like, well, when am I going to use a barbell, Josh? I go, to me, it's not, we never have the goal being the implement. To me, that it's what is our goal, and then we go down the path of which implement is going to allow us to accomplish that the best way possible. So I would say you can use a barbell, but realize the barbell was created because dumbbells were first, and people and these equipment companies wanted a dumbbell you could put two hands on. That's a barbell. And initially, if you look at the barbell initially was actually very small, and that has a lot to do with the expense of steel and iron at the time. But what you saw is over time, as the barbell got longer and the plate, they started loading it more, right? So when you make something heavier and heavier, that's very stable, what do people stop doing? They stop moving. Because now the only way you can lift this thing is to be in a very stable environment. You tend to lift it up and down. That's why the modern barbell is a sagittal plane implement. It's made to be lifted up and down. That's how it's used. So when people try to take things and use them out of context is when they often run into problems, and they just miss the fact there's other tools that can do that job better.
Yeah. Overcomer Nation, you are getting an education today, right? Because we talked about, I know we have fitness enthusiasts on here. We got members of our clubs on here. We got fit pros on here, fitness business owners. But for those of you, when Josh said multi-planar, right? There's 3 planes of motion that we move in, but too often, the equipment that we use is just really going to get us to move in a single plane of motion. So he was talking about being challenged from all 3 directions. He was also talking about something very important too, that it's not about the tool, but it's about like, what's the end goal with the tool? Because, when am I ever going to lift the barbell, right? But on the other hand, what I personally like about the Sandbag is that it mimics more often what I want to do in real life. I'm going to be a grandfather soon. Oh my goodness. I don't want to pick up a baby, and that baby, unfortunately, just won't stay balanced like a dumbbell will or like a barbell will. He's going to want to squirm around and do different things. What would you say to that about, how a Sandbag, mimics that the weights that we want to handle in real life? I'm sure you have more to say about it than I do.
Yeah, if you can't tell, I'm never short on words. I think that's a good way to help most people just like gain interest in the implement. But what I would say is, where people get caught up and misdirected with functional training is they think they have to replicate what they're doing in daily life. That's what a lot of people think is functional training. That's not what functional training is. That would be like saying an athlete has to replicate their sport in the gym, which they don't do. You build up the qualities. So for me, it's always like, hey, what qualities is this individual lacking to allow them to move more efficiently? I think speed coach Lee Taft said it very well many years ago. He's like, why do athletes lift? It's to be more efficient, to develop speed and power and force more efficiently. And I think the same with our clients, right? If you can move more efficiently, you'll be able to demonstrate power, strength, all those things. You'll be able to have better endurance. It doesn't take, anyone can imagine that if you're inefficient with your movement, you're going to fatigue faster, you can develop compensations and so forth. So for me, it's always looking at what inefficiencies does that person have in the primary movement patterns, and then the Sandbag usually fits into this, but like, how are we then going to teach them via using the implement almost as a secondary coach to increase those qualities? So if I tell you, like, we've all used these horrible terms, I think as coaches, like use your core, like that's meaningless to people, right? But if I can have you do a specific action with a bag to understand how to brace your core, you feel that, you're like, oh, that's what they wanted me to do. I understand now. So now if I take that in context into many different things, you understand what that feels like and what that quality is. It's doing things like that, or understanding that, hey, you know what? I need you to use your lats when you do a squat. Well, how do you use your lats? Where are they? Well, I'm going to have you hug this and try to rip it apart. Oh, okay. You don't need to know your lats. You just felt them like by doing the action. So a lot of times what we'll do is the bags allow us so many layers of progressions because we're not beholden only to load. We can change the load position. We can change your body position. We can change the plane of motion. So that means we can more incrementally progress people. So in the example of building up real life strength qualities, we can do that because we're not locked into, you have to do any specific lift. right? A lot of systems, they try to fit people into their system. We try to fit the system to the people. So it's like, by having a system, we can figure out where you need to start, where are you at, and where are you going. But if you only have exercises, then everyone starts chasing things that may not be beneficial to them, or even things that they need to improve upon. So understanding concepts and principles allows us to then address people very specifically with the tool, using the tool, like I said, as a secondary coach to help them to understand, because verbally I can explain things perfectly to you, but if you've never felt it before, how are you supposed to replicate it or create that movement? So, but now if you have something that gives you that feedback and understanding of what I want, now it makes a lot more sense, and I can translate that to so many more things.
You know, I like the idea of the Sandbag being a secondary coach. There's a term, self-limiting exercise, that's found in certain pieces of functional equipment where, you know, you're not going to know if you're sitting on a machine necessarily if you're doing it wrong or right. And of course, the machine's going to do a lot of the work for you, hopefully keeping you on track. But how would that apply to the Sandbag, you know, self-limiting?
Well, I mean, it comes in different forms. So, I mean, for example, if you don't have a proper hip hinge and you don't know how to produce power correctly, you're not going to be able to clean the weight upon the fist in the correct manner. You'll start fumbling around, it'll fall off, it'll go in the wrong position, you'll over clean it, people start to overcompensate and try to lean back. So, you know, there's lots of ways that can happen, but there's also subtle ways as a coach's had. I think one of the beauties is that with the Sandbag is that the coach gets to actually coach. And by that, I mean, you know, going back to the example of having the weight upon the shoulder, it sounds simple enough, but most people don't have the pelvic stability control to not allow their hips to shift or to rotate. Now, you may not know you're doing that as you're doing it, but as a coach, I can see very easily if you're doing that. So that could be a something like, oh, you're not ready for that yet because you can't control the position of your pelvis when you're doing that. So I may take you back to another variation of the squat to build up those qualities, or use other exercise to build up those qualities so you can come back to it and do it well. Because to me, that's a sign, like you were mentioning, like running. Well, if you can't do that in the squat, imagine what your pelvis is doing when you're running, which is far more complex.
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I can run a mile, as you well know, badly or really well, but I can still accomplish the goal. Right. So it's the coach's responsibility to look at, like, are you performing it well enough to earn the right to do that movement? Or do you need to take a couple steps back and we need to build stuff up to get there? Right. Yeah. Because that will ruin our efficiency otherwise. Yeah. Right. That we're trying to chase anyway. So for us, it's like, you know, the self-limiting thing can come in different forms. It's also one of those things like, you know, if someone's, let's say, doing a dead bug, and they're laying on their back and we have them pulling apart the handles, because that's how we get people to understand how to use their core properly. But, you know, they're starting to fatigue and the fatigue is coming in, they're starting to let their wrist bend back, or they're taking their fingers off. You know, there's neurological fatigue that happens. Then I need to stop them, right? I just gotten a signal from how they're holding the weight that they're fatigued. Like, I'll give them a chance to fix it. I'll give them a cue like, hey, John, you know, make sure to grab that. But if it's obviously like they keep defaulting to that, they're fatigued. So then I need to understand we've just hit a limit, and now we need to stop and move on to something else. So the self-limiting is, I think, not only for the individual, but for the coach as well. Yeah.
And I love how the Sandbag can be such a great tool, a secondary coach, to help you understand that. You know, we've talked a lot about core today, and a lot of times people think core, they think crunches, they think plank. They don't understand that, like, you know, that we're creating a similar load maybe with a frontal squat and the Sandbag, you know, to engage our core, right? You know, I mean, and also just how a coach can observe a client and see, okay, now I can tell. I couldn't tell maybe before when you're lifting that balanced weight, you know, where you really needed to address things. But now with this dynamic variable resistance that we got going on, it's easier to spot things.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that we have more of an older population, not necessarily athletes, but, you know, people that want to work on balance, maybe, you know, hip surgeries, knee surgeries, different things like that. I mean, we have some younger, but a very older population here at our location. And the thing I find about the Sandbags is it's not intimidating to them. Like, they'll put it on their hips and work on hip bridges. They're not afraid to pick it up. It's not, you know, bulky or hurt them to lift on it. They're not as frightened if I say, you know, do a different, you know, exercise with dumbbell, kettlebell, something like that, they'll tend to grab smaller. Whereas sandbag, I see them going, they'll pick up heavier. They're not afraid to put it on their body or to hug it tight and do exercises. So I like that it feels kind of soft to them or whatever. It's not hurtful or bulky, will hurt them. So our members really enjoy using them for so many different things because it's not intimidating to them.
That's great to hear. Because we find that a lot that, basically what you're describing is that people don't have a reference point, right?
Yeah.
They don't they may, if they see a barbell, they may reference something maybe that about a high school experience, or a friend of theirs said they were doing exercise and they hurt, or they were doing exercise at some point, they got hurt, or just the idea of iron. And like you said, I had a friend that mentioned the same thing, that the soft side of it, like people think like metal means like intense and like I can't do it. And things like that. And, but we also get the other side of the spectrum too, where people don't respect it because it's not iron, or they don't, they're like, oh, iron's the hard when you want to get strong. But I'm like, but you understand that, like you guys mentioned, the instability component, there's the part of the movement accuracy thing too. And you're talking about live weight was no 2 reps are the same. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So one of the big reasons you mentioned machines, that we don't use machines, is to avoid what's called pattern overload. So as everyone knows, if I get locked into a machine, the machine is dictating the path of the movement, right? Mm-hmm. And that can develop overuse pattern syndromes and overuse of certain muscles. And that's why we use free weights. But then if you take that to another level, the sandbag allows us to even get that more so, that every time, because you don't want a huge, like, the thing about instability is people think more is always better. And the research tells us that that's the opposite, that if something is drastically unstable, our nervous system spends so much time trying to protect ourselves that we don't actually get to move. We're so scared about falling and like hurting ourselves that our nervous system sort of shuts down our body. So we only want like very slight levels of instability. So by having that slight shift, having that, different dimension, no 2 reps are the same. So that means your body's also always working harder. That's why people get tired faster, because they can't just groove it, right? Like if you do a kettlebell swing or a kettlebell snatch, you can groove it and you become efficient. It's like running, right? You want to get more efficient because then you don't spend as much energy. But with the sandbags, it's always, every rep is so different that it's always just a lot of effort. So it goes into, again, just managing, like that's why we start people with lower reps and stuff, because they're just surprised how fatiguing it can be. And also that they're just using so many muscles in the process because of their having to balance that out.
This kind of, I love the fact that no 2 reps are the same. It kind of takes me back to something we were talking about earlier. Like, you can't design a routine that exactly mimics life, but you do want to use tools that prepare you for life. Right. And I think about how the majority of after what you said, the majority of the people that we train are women. The majority of the people that we train are old enough to be mothers. They're primarily the shoppers in the home, not to be sexist. I sometimes like to go and do the shopping and all that kind of thing, but primarily they're the ones picking up the bags of dog food out of the trunk and, trying to carry them in the house. And what tool is best to prepare you to pick up the kid or to pick up the dog food? You ask me, I'm going to say it's a sandbag. That's awesome. That's awesome. Josh, tell us a little bit about your session that we have coming up. Well, you're probably doing it in multiple Perform Betters after this podcast airs. I believe the next one will be the Providence, Rhode Island Perform Better. And it says most think functional training is a good idea, but the reality is they don't trust it. They don't trust that it can provide the fitness and performance results that they want to achieve with their clients. Why do you think that there's this this line of thinking, this thing that we have to break through here? Tell me a little bit about that.
It came from actually just experience working with coaches. And when I was teaching, is that, I remember one specific session, I was going over, systemizing everything and programming, and a young coach raised their hand and go, is this strength training or is this functional training? I'm like, they're supposed to be the same thing. And also just very often on social media, I'll get feedback from people going, oh, this is great for movement, but if you want to build muscle, you need to do this. So it was very clear to me that there is just a misunderstanding of functional training completely. I see it in the way that people try to define it, the examples they use. So it makes it difficult to have a conversation about it if we don't even understand what it is. Right. And so what I wanted to do is clarify what the intent and what the methodology of functional training was, and therefore how it does sort of check off so many of our fitness goal boxes. If you want to increase stability, mobility, it does that. If you want to build muscle and endurance does that. If you want, it basically should be the way we all train. If you think about it, bodybuilding is the most unnatural thing we can do. Isolating muscles is the most unnatural thing we could be doing to our body. This past year, I started getting into Tai Chi a lot, just to help manage with some of my issues. And there's a philosophy in Tai Chi that, because it's connected to nature. And if you look at nature, there is nothing that's isolated in nature. In fact, if you change any one variable in nature, an animal, introducing animal, a plant, whatever it may, it can change the whole ecosystem, right? So why do we think the body is this isolated bunch of parts?
Right.
It makes no sense. The worst thing we could ever say is the body is a machine. It's not a machine at all. It's a highly interactive, complex, organism. In fact, there's published research that says, you guys know what the number one risk factor for obesity is?
What's that?
Childhood trauma.
Really? Childhood trauma. How about that?
That's the number one predictor of obesity. And that shows you why when people talk about mind body, like I think about the old body, people think, oh, I'm going to go mind body. I just saw someone talk about this today. So I think about this muscle. That's not what mind body is, as you guys probably know. Mind body refers to our mind impacts our body and vice versa. So our thoughts can impact, if you're stressed out, your perception of pain goes up. If you're, stressed out, you can develop certain diseases, right? We see that play out. And so I just want to give clarity to people, like, what is functional training? What does it look like as a methodology? And then how does it accomplish all our goals? And how do we program it correctly so that we can achieve those outcomes that we want to achieve with our clients?
Yeah. I could go down a whole nother path with you on that mind body. I was listening to something the other day that really resonated with me. And it said more important than the food that we eat is what we think about it too. Just how powerful that is. Now that is not an excuse to go eat ice cream and think good about it. But let me, back to that. I would like you to speak to that science, because the other third of our population, or 25% to a third of our population, is the men. And they sometimes have muscle gain goals. And so what would you say, let's say I have a younger guy or any guy in here that says, I want to gain muscle, so I'm not sure if I should use that Sandbag. What would you say to them?
Well, I always like to be that person because my background is also in education. I answer a question with a question. Why? Why can't it?
Right.
And it tends to be they don't really have a reason why. They don't know, other than it's just unfamiliar to them.
Right.
Yeah.
And we all do. We put things that are unfamiliar to us. We try to put in context with things that we're familiar with. And they're overwhelmingly, especially in this age of social media, they're seeing so many people doing one thing. Why aren't they doing this other thing if it's good? And we all know that's obviously not the case. That what you're seeing I think I had to hear a doctor say, just because it's popular doesn't mean it's good.
Right.
So it's one of those things. Like, then I get into the actual education part, right? So why can't it build muscle? I need you to tell me where you're coming from with that response, right? Well, because it doesn't hit my biceps. Well, in what exercise? Like, what are you doing? Because if you look even in a lot of squats or other positions, we're using our arms a lot to support the weight. So whether or not we're doing a direct bicep curl or we're doing a bent row, for example, where you're obviously using your arms, there's lots of not obvious ways that we're using our arms as well. And then I would say to them, like, have you ever looked at the body of a gymnast? I think most people wouldn't mind having, especially guys, having the upper body of a gymnast, and they don't lift weights.
Right.
Have you looked at a lot of like martial arts? Look at Bruce Lee back in the day. Like, not a heavy lifter, has a pretty impressive physique, can develop a lot of strength and power. So it's just the realization of just being compassionate to the person, understanding they're trying to figure things out in their head because you're introducing them something, a different thought process and a way of approaching something. And what our job is I like to find out the reason I ask those questions. I need to know where you're coming from first, because I want to talk with you, not at you. Right. And so if I don't know what you're thinking and I don't know where you're coming from, then I can't talk you through the process. And there's going to be obviously a level of trust that has to come with it, because again, so many people are influenced by what they see. And so if they see everybody doing X, they want to do X. I had a client that was a very successful CEO. And one day, he stopped, after we did our exercise, and he stopped and he's like, hey, Josh, how come we train this way? Don't train, in his mind, the normal way. The normal way was sitting there working chest and working arms. And I said, Brad, I said, if I can make you $1 million, would you want it in a year or a month? He's like, a month. I'm like, well, this is like making you $1 million in a month. He's like, okay. Like, it just made sense to him. Like, this is more efficient. Right. Yeah. And so it's also like, who are you looking at? I remember a 18-year-old that came to me as was having problems with his back deadlifting. He was doing barbell dips. I said, oh, I'll help you. Comes in and I'm watching, giving some tips. But then I go, so what program were you following when you're doing this? And he was mentioning this book, and it was like, oh, it's by a world champion powerlifter. I said, by who? And he said, a world champion powerlifter. We did this like 3 times because he wasn't getting my point that he was not a world champion powerlifter. Like he's an 18-year-old kid trying to do, it's like, I'm going to start playing basketball and I'm going to try to play like LeBron James.
Yeah, right.
You know, but that's, I understand the thought process that I want to get good at this. So I'm going to learn from I'm going to do what the best people do. But we also know in development of athletes, I would never train a high school kid like a college kid, not like I wouldn't train a college kid like a pro. Mm-hmm. So, but we do that to ourselves all the time in the gym. We go, oh, this is what I want to look like. This is what I want to do. I'm going to do what they do. But that's not what you need.
Right.
And then we can get the whole discussion, and sure, it's off topic of like, is what you're seeing actually real? Meaning, are there other things that they're doing that you wouldn't want to do, i.e. drugs or, whatever it may be, that are making you think this is what you want to do, but it's not actually what you want to do.
Exactly. And I think the way you started off too about the picture that we have in our mind, if we saw Arnold Schwarzenegger most commonly curling a dumbbell, we think that that's the secret to having a bigger bicep, and maybe not understanding the principles, of the rep ranges, the muscle failure, the things, I think about the dive bomber push-up, and I'm like, I don't know which one's tougher, the 300-pound bench press or the dive bomber push-up. And I tell you what, that my pectorals don't have eyes, but they know when they're failing and they know when they need to get stronger, and everything else involved,
and people will see the Schwarzenegger bicep curl, but they won't see the Franco Colombo doing an iron or a lever on the gymnastics rings at Venice Beach in the 60s.
Right. Yeah. Just,
so it's like, which one created the body, right?
Exactly.
Probably both,
Right. Yeah. So how about just one final thing on injury resilience? Injury resilience, you're going to be teaching on that at Providence Perform Better and other places. How do you think that because people hear a lot about rehab, maybe they don't think a lot about prehab or preventing those injuries that we need rehab for. How do you think that the Sandbag helps with injury resilience?
I think it helps us teach people qualities and develop qualities that they often ignore in the gym. So I'm going to try not to get too geeky here, but to develop injury resilience, you need to know what the mechanism of injuries are to certain structures of the body. So in other words, if you don't know what causes injury, then it's hard to train for it. And unfortunately, in the fitness industry, we think everything is a strength issue. It's not. Mm-hmm. The literature is emphatic. It is not typically a strength issue. It usually comes down to a couple of things. It's a motor control issue, meaning when does the muscle fire within the chain at the right time? So it's more of a coordination issue within the chains. That's why movement patterns are very important, because that's the way that your body learns to do that. 2 is decelerative strength. So a lot of people are so focused on force production, but it's actually force resilience that dictates. So if you look at rotator cuff injuries in throwing athletes, it's generally because they can't decelerate their arm properly. Mm-hmm. It's not because the rotator cuff wasn't strong enough to produce force. It couldn't resist the force in throwing. So the same thing when you're talking about, like, my wife worked at a fall prevention clinic before, like, you need to teach people, like, when you take that step and you sort of miss it, like, how do you then decelerate and catch yourself? That's not something that we often teach, not to make people fall, but like, an example would be, let's say, a forward step deadlift. We're teaching you to decelerate and step into a hip hinge, and you catch yourself, and then you redistribute yourself back up. You have enough power to bring yourself back up. It's also in the reason the planes of motion are important, because most people get injured because they can't resist forces that are acting upon their body that are coming from different angles, laterally, rotationally, and so forth. That's why having the ability to resist rotation or have frontal planar lateral strength is important. You mentioned running. So many running injuries are correlated to lack of frontal plane stability and strength. So which makes sense, because if you're dipping your pelvis every step you take and you're running with force and power, guess what's going to happen to your knee, your low back, even your shoulders and upper extremities. So you need to understand what you're trying to even develop. So what the Sandbag then allows us to do is to develop those qualities very specifically. We have the ability, like it wouldn't probably be very safe to do a forward step deadlift with a barbell, right? But we can do that with the bags, or, I can do like one of our famous drills is a max lunge where I'm lunging back, but the bag's rotating to my side. So as I lunge in the sagittal plane in a rather unstable environment, I have to not only have enough deceleration to drop myself in the lunge without falling, but also resist this force that's pulling me off to the side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if you look at injuries in new moms and actually firemen, they're very similar. It's a lack of frontal plane stability and strength.
Wow.
Because what do moms do? What do new moms do all the time? They hold their kids like this.
Yes. Yeah. On their side. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what do firemen do all the time?
Well, right. Yeah. Sure. Everything's over to the side. Yeah. Very, very interesting. Yeah. That's something that we need to think about. Is the training that you're doing going to help you prevent injuries? And these are the different variables that Josh just mentioned. Are you addressing things on a multi-planar level and that kind of thing? That is awesome. That's awesome. So, there's lots of ways for people to dive in more. If you're a coach, there's ways for you to learn like some of the techniques and skills that you were talking about today, like, being able to spot things in your clients and, then address them by, including certain programming and that kind of stuff. What are the ways that you have available for people to learn more and get more education from you or from the Sandbag?
Sure, I appreciate it. Yeah, and we always try to lead with education. We often say people perceive us as an equipment company, but we're actually an education company with a piece of equipment. And so it's like the tool helps you understand these concepts, but it's important to understand the concepts and the techniques. So we have both live and online programs. They both are awesome. Both have their benefits, right? In a live course, you get to work with a coach and get to work hands-on. The benefit to online is that, we're not hampered by time, so we can sort of deliver a little bit more content, but we try to blend the two. If people are interested, we can explain the differences and what people received in both. But the education is so important. Then the tool makes so much more sense because, years ago, Alan said to me, he's like, you know what your problem is? I'm like, I have a laundry list, but go ahead. He's like, you need to feel it to understand it. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the troubles with social media nowadays. If you're looking at what we do, but have no frame of reference, it's so hard to figure out what does that feel like, what's going on there, because it's not something you've ever done before. That's why I think some people go, don't believe it, or they go kind of use something else. Because once you actually use the implement with the intent it was designed for, everything makes so much sense. Like every time we have a live event or someone goes through a course, they have so many aha moments, right? The light bulbs go off, I get what you're saying now. That makes so much more sense now, just from a very simple, concept of like pulling the handles apart to create core stability to, different positions and progressions that we use. And people go, oh, I understand why you're doing it that way. Mm-hmm. So we have everything, you can go online. My wife has some wonderful corrective exercise courses too. So we have certifications, we have courses, and we have workout programs. So depending upon how you want to enter our program, there's always an option for anybody, but they're always welcome to email us to the website to get more information on what's right for them.
Yeah. Could you say that website for our audience?
Sure. It's dvrtfitness.com. So there's a contact page, but there's tons of free information on there. There's blogs, there's videos, so people get into it. You can get into the weeds pretty fast. So if you're looking for specific information, we can help you filter that out as well. Okay, awesome. And how do people follow you to get more of you, get more education? I don't know if anybody wants that. We have our Facebook group, our DVRT fitness group, where we post a lot of our content and videos. It's a safe arena where people can, share their stuff and ask questions. On Instagram, we have our Ultimate Sandbag account. I have Josh Henkin, DVRT, and my wife has a long one, I think it's _ Bento. I don't know if I follow her, physiotherapist, but if you follow us, you'll be able to follow her. So that's where we try to share, because what we want to do with our, not only give people ideas, but to help them filter all the overwhelming amount of information, because we know not everything on the internet is good information. So we want to try to be a trusted resource that people can go to, and they're going to get a genuine, informative, idea of what they're trying to accomplish and do. And they can ask questions and get a reliable answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll find the right people that do. That's awesome. That's awesome. A lot of times people get overwhelmed by information. So I guess I'm going to ask this question for those that might have it out there. I'm a fitness enthusiast, or I'm a coach, and I want to get more into Sandbag training. What is my first step besides going to Providence, Rhode Island, perform better, and watching you present? What's my first step? I think if you're just wanting to like take your time and go like, I just need to like tune out. I need to like filter out everything a little bit. I did a book with Ragnar several years ago. Even though it's several years old, it's still good. It's a good starting place. Like you start to understand our principles, our concepts, the techniques. There's some programs to give you examples. What I'm most proud of too with the book is there's a lots of what not to do. Because I think a lot of times like we don't know like what we should be doing either. So we really outline that out. And I think that's a great resource for people. It's on our website. If you can't find it, just let us know. It's a nice book that just sort of gives a good starting point and jumping off point for people. And then everything else will start to make more sense if you get those really base concepts down.
Could you say the name of that book one more time?
I think it's a really clever name, like the DVRT Ultimate Sandbag Train book. But
I love
I
it.
think there's a version I'm looking up right now. I think there's still a Kindle version up on Amazon as well. I just will put out there that, you know, I'm not going to say we've been very fortunate. I've been able to work with a lot of coaches that have influenced me in how we do like progress and evolve things. But I do have to warn people, there's lots of bad information regarding sandbag training out there as well. So just be aware too, when you start looking around at places, like not all information is good information.
Well, you know, it's clear that you've done your homework, and, you know, certainly I'm not shy about a book that's several years old, because I've learned great information today from things that are hundreds of years old or thousands of years old. So, you know,
as the author, you always, as soon as something's published, you're like thinking about 10 different things you wish you could have added or done differently. But I think it's a great starting place for a lot of people. So I think it's still a good place for people to start looking at and getting familiar.
Yeah, and we know the place to start. And now we also know their source and the website to keep on adding that information as well. So, Josh, thanks so much. Any final words for our audience?
I just want to thank you guys for giving me an opportunity to have a platform, because I think, you know, hopefully it comes across that, you know, I'm very passionate about these ideas, and the more people we can expose them, the better quality life we can offer people. And I think that's what we all want to do as fitness professionals, is help people live a healthier and happier life.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for being generous with your time. It was educational for us and educational for our audience, and inspiring. You know, super excited to watch you present and perform better. So thank you for being on.
Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening, Overcomer Nation. Make sure, if you haven't already, give us a 5-star rating. Make sure that you share this and subscribe so you can see all of our future content.
That's right. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future show, go to overcomers-podcast.com. If you're interested in our franchise opportunities with Journey 333, then go to www.journeyfitness333.com. And finally, if you like what you heard today and you feel like you're somebody that needs a bit more coaching, go to travisbarnes.com.